This video is on lesson 6.1 in our math book called Finding the Area of a Rectangle with Fractional Side Lengths. In class, we talked about if we have a square with a side that is as long as 9 inches. Each side is 9 inches long. You do 9 times 9. The area of a square is side squared, so 9 squared, which is 9 times 9, will give you an area of 81 inches squared for that square. For rectangles, the area formula is length times width. Length times width. So if you have if you have a rectangle with a length was fractional side lengths. So what if the length was given in fractions? So the width is 3/5 feet and the length is 4/5 feet. The formula stays the same, length times width. This is why it's important. Here it's important for you to know how to multiply fractions. You would take your 3/5 and multiply it by your 4/5, and you would get your area of the rectangle here. And if you do that, you'll get 12 over 25. So your answer is the area of the rectangle is 12 over 25 feet squared. Remember, do not forget the squared for area. When you're giving area, you have to have this little 2 up here. If your answer does not include squared, your answer is incomplete because the only unit in which you give area is the area has to be square units. That was the easier method. Another method you could multiply by fractions in order to find the area of a rectangle is if you take your 3/5 width, so remember we're doing the width of the rectangle is 3/5 and the length of it is 4/5. You could represent 3/5 and 4/5 once again, kind of like drawing a diagram. You could draw a big square like this. You could divide it into 5 parts. Divide the length and width into 5 parts. So now, my width of my rectangle, I'm going to highlight 3/5 of it, right? Because the width of the rectangle is 3/5 feet. And I'm going to draw a bigger rectangle and separate it into 5 parts. And then I'm going to highlight 3 of them. And for my length, I want 4/5. So I already have 1/5. Now I have 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, and my last 5/5, 5/5. And I'm going to highlight 4 of them. The length of my rectangle is 4 of them. So 4/5 times 3/5. Now I can look at this area only. I'm only going to look at this red area right here. This is the area I'm trying to figure out, okay? We're doing 3/5 times 4/5. All we did was we illustrated what does 3/5 actually look like. We separated it into 5 parts. We chose 3 of them. And what does 4/5 actually look like? We separated our length of the rectangle into 5 parts and we highlighted 4 of them. That's all we did so far. And then, if you were to do each square in here, in this red rectangle, what's the fraction of each square of rectangle? You would do 1/5 times 1/5 because if this is 1/5 of this whole side and this is 1/5 of this whole side of the rectangle, you would do 1/5 times 1/5. This is your square right here. This is one square, and you would multiply that length and width together, and that will give you 125. So 1/5, let's just do it over here so we have more space, times 1/5. That would give you 1/25. And that means, I'm going to highlight them in blue now. That means every one of these blue squares or spots has an area of 1/25 feet squared. And then you just count how many 1/25 do you have. You would take your 1/25 and you'll multiply it by how many squares you have here, which is 12. You have 12 squares. So you would have 1/25, and you would find out, you would have 1/25, and you would have 12 of those, and you would find out that you would end up with 12 over 25, which is the same answer we got earlier when we just multiplied 3/5 times 4/5. Now please go to page 268 in your textbook and do guided learning number 1 in your textbook. The question says find the area of a rectangle that is 3/4 foot by 2/3 foot. 3/4 foot by 2/3 foot. And find it in 2 different ways. That's what it asks you to do. So we already learned 2 different methods you could do this. So please go ahead and do this guided learning problem. You can also find the area of a rectangle if your length and width are given in a mixed number. What if I tell you the length of a rectangle is 4.5 units long and the width of the rectangle is 1/3 units long? You would have to do 4.5 times 1/3, which, remember, when you have a mixed number times a fraction, you have to make your mixed number a fraction, so you would make an improper fraction. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9. Your improper fraction is going to look like this, 9/2 times 1/3. Now you can go ahead and do your multiplication, and you would get 9 divided by 3, which 9/6, which simplified would end up being 3/2, which would end up being 1.5. We know that 3 divided by 2 is 1.5. Now your answer would have to be in square units. If I don't tell you inches or feet or whatever, if I don't give you the unit or the label, you would just have to say units, because you don't know what the unit is, but you still have to give a complete answer here for area. You would say units square, so units with a little 2 on top, or square units. Either way, it makes sense. Now, what if I gave you something that looks like this? I'm not giving you the units. You have to figure out the length of the units yourself and the width. If I give you a rectangle like this, and if I tell you, find the area of the shaded rectangle. So I'll give you this rectangle, but then I'll shade this part of it red. I'll shade this whole part red. I already split the length. This is my length. I already split it into how many parts? 1, 2, 3, 4 parts, if you could notice. See where my black lines are? So I split this length into 4 parts, and I ask you, what's the area of the shaded parts? I also split the last box here, the last unit. I split it into four parts within it, and then I shade 1 part, 2 parts, 3 parts. What if I did this? I shaded 3 parts, and I ask you, what's the length of this rectangle? You would tell me that it's 1, 2, 3 parts, right? This is your hole, 3 holes, right? Isn't this 1 hole, 2 hole, 3 holes on the length? And what's your fraction here? It will be 3/4, because I shaded 3 out of the 4 pieces in that last piece. So the length is 3 3/4 here. What about what my width is? What's my width? My width is on this side, by the way. And what's my width when I split it into 4 parts and I shaded one of them? That means I split it into 4 parts. There's your denominator, and I shaded one of them. There's your numerator, 1/4. So here I'm going to multiply 3/4 times 1/4 in order for me to find the area of the shaded part of this rectangle. Once again, you have to make your improper fraction, and then that would be 4 times 3, which is 12, plus 3, which is 15. Your improper fraction is 15/4 times 1/4. You would get 15/16. And there's your area. Your area has to be in units square. You can just write U if you want. So square units or units square, because I didn't tell you whether it was feet or inches or anything, so your answer is just going to be in units. Please go ahead and do guided learning on page 269. Actually, I just did this one for you guys. I just did page 269, guided learning number 2. So why don't you guys go ahead and do let's practice numbers 1 through 7, and we will check it in class later. So let's practice starts on page 269, and do all of the numbers 1 through 7, and we will discuss.